Hey, Seth, welcome to the show. As a way of getting started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Brian. Yeah, so Seth White. So I am a major enterprise rep for a company called NextThink. As you can hear by my accent, I'm not native to the US. I started off with the company I'm with now, NextThink, in December 2015. And a couple of years later, my CEO had the misguided view that I'd add some value for him in North America, which is now, of course, the biggest space where we want to grow. And so I relocated myself and my wife and I guess at the time, 7-month pregnant wife and an 18-month-old son to Salt Lake City, Utah, where I now cover the West.
Yeah. It's a lot like the UK, isn't it?
No, to say no, it's not actually.
You've noticed a difference?
Yeah, just a few. But I lived in the US as a teenager.
You did.
Between the ages of 12 and 18, and that's where I was. So I've always kind of had this a slight allegiance to the US as well. So it was always interesting for me to have the opportunity to relocate back. So yeah, it's been going great. But
So you like it?
yeah, absolutely love it. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. And how'd you get into sales?
Good question. So when I was studying at the University of Nottingham in the UK, just doing business, I was working selling cell phones part-time. The job prior to that, I was in sort of an account management role, not sales or anything, but there was a big problem and I dealt with it. And I was only 19 at the time. And one of the ladies in the room turned to me and she was, "Hey, you should go into sales." And I didn't really think of it. But when I went to university, I thought 2 days a week, part-time gig selling cell phones, start from the very, very ground. And I enjoyed that more than my education. So decided after that, I'd like to get into the enterprise space where I was doing cell phones initially, then moved into, then jumped a couple times because, to be quite candid, they didn't pay very well, to be honest. So went into networks and then was tipped off by one of my colleagues who said, "Hey, software seems to be a really great place for sales." And I was just kind of like, okay. So I found a software company and they took me on and then I ended up at NextThink. So yeah.
Yeah. And what's it like selling in the US versus the UK? Because like on
Yeah.
LinkedIn, I've never sold in the UK.
Yeah.
But all the
So,
people in the UK on LinkedIn, that won't work here.
yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So there is a difference. The primary difference I find is that in the UK is that face-to-face meetings are a lot more commonplace.
Yeah.
They expect you to get on a train for 3 hours if you need to get there. So that was one of the big differences. And I think in terms of a culture in the US, it's a bit more of an openness to buy and sell. It doesn't necessarily make sales cycles easier, but what it does do is makes people a bit more open to new ideas sometimes. But having said that, the common denominator in that space, I guess, of a transaction happening is oftentimes the representative. So you've got to make what you have, right? So the benefit in the UK, lots of face-to-face, which is really powerful. Whereas here it's quite a lot remote until it gets really serious. But US has the advantage of, I think, obviously a lot more enterprises, but also a more greater propensity to buy.
Yeah. And who is your buyer persona for your product?
Yeah, so buyer persona for the solution we sell NextThink is CIO or COO or CIO -1, so VP of operations, VP of end user computing. That's the sort of space that we find ourselves, VP of infrastructure operations, etc.
So real easy to get their time, right?
Oh yeah, just real easy. Just pick up the phone.
They're waiting for you.
No, yeah, and that's what makes it difficult, right? These are people who very, very busy. But the good thing about the solution that I am responsible for selling is a very, what I would call a strategic solution, whereby there is a very crystal clear reason as to why someone of that level should be involved. It's not a matter of just getting to them and rubbing shoulders with the guy who signs the check. It's too self-serving, but there is I have very clear reasons why we expect our prospects to engage at that level, and it always works out for them and us. So everyone wins in that regard.
Okay. Do they recognize the brand name? Are you that well known?
No, not at all. So our company is we're originally a Swiss-based company, So a Swiss software company, it's a bit
Oh
obscure.
yeah.
Uh,
Can't think
so
of one, right?
exactly right. Naming all the Swiss software companies, but yeah. So coming to the US, that's one of the harder things. We oftentimes I found in the US, other vendors or solutions out there will scream about their product from the mountaintops before it's even built. And so with our solution, it was kind of the solution's ready and exceptional. However, people don't know who we are, so it's a matter of just immediately being able to get that initial engagement, and then usually providing it's positioned and the values explained in the right way, they understand and they take our lead on how to purchase or go through a cycle with us.
And do you have any inbound, or is it all outbound?
Since I've been here, coming up to 5 years, I've not had an inbound inquiry, not once.
Wow.
No. And here's the thing, right? I mean, inbound inquiries are great, but it's they just don't happen. You have to kind of forge things forward yourself, use initiative, and understand that you're accountable for two things, right? You're accountable for a pipeline, and you're accountable for a portion, at least, of that pipeline to close and turn into actual revenue. I'm not targeted on activity, and I can't hold marketing accountable and say, hey, you didn't generate me X amount of leads, so you're gone now. That's not how it works, right? So, but I've got a product, and that's what matters most, right? And a team to support me. So.
And what's your territory?
So I cover all of the West, actually. So as of last year, it was the Tola region, so Texas, etc., and then also the West. I was the only one, right, on the ground, whereas now things have broken up. So now I'm covering the West, and I'm kind of in a dual role at the moment. I am both an individual contributor, but I'm also managing a new rep who we've just brought on board as well. So that's kind of a quasi role, but I'm ultimately an individual contributor from a I guess, compensation standpoint.
And how do you prioritize such a large patch?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So to prioritize a patch the size of the West is very much to focus on the areas where you've had success before, so it's easily referenceable. Looking at the actual existing accounts that you have in the West that are successful, and being able to reference that space as well. But at the same time, that's the safer side of the play. But then there's also, what do we need to do to build our reputation and to secure agreements with major logos that will send a message to the West, right? Who are the ones we need to go for to target? And that's what we've had some great success with in the past couple of years. Very, very big software companies are engaged with us and other large enterprises. And so that's building a really strong reputation. So it's a combination of the two, really.
Okay. Yeah, because like in my book, I call that the kingpin strategy, where you try and find who's the kingpin that if you knock down, they knock down other pins behind them.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that it's not always. I always say to engagements who I'm talking to is when they get into the middle of a cycle and they want to learn more about us and our customers. But if I'm proactive in terms of saying, look, and I always say this, you're in good company, right? I let them know that they're not the first one, they're not the early adopters. There are other people around them who have been through this journey, who have trusted me and my team in helping them come to a decision that's right for them. Then they're a lot more open to be like, okay, so show me how, because the space that with Nextlink where we operate in, it's not a very well defined space, which brings about it's a two-edged sword. There is the downside of people aren't knocking on our door saying, hey, we need your solution. However, it creates an opportunity whereby we can actually define the sales cycle, that they've never been through it before. So they are willing to take our advice based upon what's going to help them make a really good decision. So two-edged sword. It can be difficult, but it's a really good opportunity as well.
And your cold outreach, is that to the CIO, the COO?
Yeah, the cold outreach will be to CIOs. I would say more the CIO minus ones, though. CIOs often get bombarded so much.
Yeah.
But on the more strategic level, your VP of operations, etc., they're the ones we often engage with. And even if they say, okay, it looks interesting, I'll push you to my guy, we'll engage with them to qualify things further. But before we enter into a formal evaluation of our software, we will 100% insist that before we do it, we need to meet with the VP of XYZ, because there is a real reason for doing that, and we take them through that and make it very easy for them to understand why. And then that gives us a lot of direction in the cycle as to what that VP actually expects. And because our solution is, again, it's a fairly not new, but it's a solution in a space that people often haven't sat down and thought about to a great extent. And it gives us an opportunity to understand how those VPs interpret our value. What's the output that we can bring to them? So I guess what I'm getting to there is there's always the idea that you start with the big business problem, the big business issue, which, yes, there are those. And of course, we need to understand them, I guess, in terms of having hygiene within your account and the sales cycle you're going through. But what's really important, at least from my experience, is to understand, how do you interpret value, right? What's actually valuable to you in your enterprise? And yeah, you may have some big business issues going on, but specific to what I've just shown you, right? How does this, you tell me how it's going to help you, and then we will work to do that, right? Within the realms of reality of what we can.
Well, yeah, because a lot of times they look at it like a Rorschach picture where you're showing them things and they're starting to see things that they could do with it that may be different than your big image.
Exactly. And that's the piece where process around, whatever process sales organizations have, MedPick, etc. They're great, but they're great in the context of bringing some sort of scalable, consistent methodology where you can say, these are the things that we need to understand. However, what's more important than capturing information is capturing information that you can fold back into a cycle, which actually helps the customer and actually helps drive your opportunity forward. So the analogy I use is, you can get all the things you need. You can get the wheels, you can get the bodywork, you can get the seats and the steering wheel, but it's not going to give you the engine, right? That's the thing. The engine is going to be often quite unique on a customer by customer basis, and that's what's going to propel things forward. They can give you all the stuff you want, doesn't mean they're going to buy something, right? So it's understanding how to use those models to actually make sure that you get a deal done, right?
Right. Because those models, because it all came out of, I know the company at Parametric, right? And I worked for a VP who came out of Parametric.
Yeah.
And it was a disaster because that was a well understood market. They had a great product.
Yeah.
People knew what you were talking about. People had to use something. It was yours or someone else's. You're not in that market, right?
Yeah. So you can put a very easy framework around that.
Right.
Rinse and repeat, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas and I think this is actually more commonplace now than that model, is that the most important thing is first, at least when we present to new people, is the first thing I do within 30 seconds is say, I want to help you understand what we are, but more importantly, what we're not, right? So let's split between, because if someone knocked on my door and said, hey, I want to sell you something, the first thing I'm going to do psychologically is say, what do I already have, right? It's one of the first things I'm going to do, or why don't I need this, right? So the first thing I'll do is kind of, this is what we're not. And then what happens is that the customer or prospect can kind of relax and have an open mind and go, oh, okay, you're none of those things. That makes my life easy. Now I know I don't have to answer a lot of irrelevant questions, because we've got them to a place where they're focusing, they're not having to ask irrelevant questions around things that aren't really pertinent to our solution.
Right, because too many reps focus on either ROI or value, but that's not always the engine.
No, it's not. It's not.
The engine could be, their career. The engine could be a different way of doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree. So I had a really great agreement we did with a large enterprise just last year, one that myself and the team who support me, we did. And what was amazing was it wasn't about solving this big problem they had. There wasn't this big burning bush and even some people were like, well, there isn't a burning bush. Are you sure? And I was like, no, I know an agreement's going to happen here, because I know that they're not just driven by problems, they're driven by a desire to be and do better, right? That can be just as powerful for someone as it could be something that's on fire. So yeah, very interesting to see that desire because of the strategy they were moving towards. Well, if you sometimes focus on nothing but a short-term problem, they will find a way to solve that problem without your solution. Right? They're going to do it. They're going to find a way to be like, oh yeah, it was great we had that meeting with you, and it was great, but we figured out a way to solve it anyway. So now your value's gone. But if you tie into things that are more strategic and long-lasting, your relevance is going to maintain. And if anything, you'll be like an oven. It'll start off colder, but it will get hotter and hotter and hotter to the point where there is no kind of reason why they wouldn't work with you. Yeah.
And what are the signals that you get that they have that vision, that engine?
Yeah, really good question. So one of the first things that we'll do, of course, is we will expect that there to be some sort of executive involvement prior to entering into a POC or proof of value exercise, which is really important. So once they get involved, most executives don't say, let's enter into an evaluation with no end in sight, right? So that's a good thing. But also we once at least, and this is another thing that is relevant with our solution, but I think it's relevant with lots of solutions in that as part of our sales cycle, yes, we know who the buyer is. We know the people immediately below them who are going to do some sort of technical validation. But one of the other things that you can do to understand the signals that are working well is to make the importance or the value that you deliver relevant to other parts of the organization, even if it's indirectly. I've always said that one of the best ways to engage with an enterprise when you're selling software, let's say you're selling a solution which has nothing to do with the networking team. But if the person responsible for networks turns to you and says, yeah, that's actually a really powerful solution for them, that's actually really positive, right? And that can be built into the justification that other people are supporting this, even in an indirect manner. So one of the things that I like to benchmark is to figure out how many stakeholders have we grown to versus the original one we started with. And then you create momentum because behind the scenes, when you're not there, they're talking and they're agreeing and they're saying yes, and this makes sense. And all you're doing there is you're actually making it easier for them to understand the perspective of the people they trust most. Yeah. And therefore, so that's one of the other big signals. And then the other one is, it's my own little silly phrase. At some point in every sales cycle, right, they have to go and do an internal presentation to secure the funding. And I call that the let the little bird fly. In other words, you have no more control, it's in their hands. And you have to hope you did the right job in enabling your champion or sponsor to go and pitch as well as or better than you can in the context of that company. Yeah. So I call it the let the little bird fly moment. And prior to that moment, if I can see this as one of their top 2 priorities of what they're doing day to day, I know they're going to do a really, really good job. And they're asking for my insight and my input on how to do that. That shows a level of humility that says, look, I want this so badly that I'm willing to say, I need your help. And I think that can be a really powerful, if someone's going, no, I know what we're doing, go away, you're kind of disrespected. It shows that you're not a trusted advisor. Exactly. They see you as kind of, yeah, okay, I'll do my thing. And then you're out of control. Whereas prior to that really important stage, I think that's a big sign.
That is a key sign, because I kind of call that partners in crime. You get that feeling that you're not a rep.
Yeah.
You're working with them to create this thing, solve a problem, create this vision. Mm-hmm. And when that little bird flies, it's scary.
It is, yeah. You're like waiting, okay.
Right, because the last thing you want is them just to show the proposal with a bunch of big numbers and product codes, yeah. and the CEO or whoever looks at it goes, why?
Well, it's funny you say that. So you mentioned something slightly earlier about it's not always ROI.
It's not always ROI.
I mean, ROI, of course, but ROI can be defined, and again, in lots of different ways. Yeah. So whenever we enter into engagements, the business case piece comes at the end, right? Because for me, I'm kind of like, look, if you want something and you see the value, you will find a way to make it work when you come to appease the finance side of the organization, right? Not manipulating or trying to skew things, but if upfront I had a rep contact me just about a year ago in a different part of the world. Said, hey, and it was another subsidiary of a larger agreement I'd done. And they said, hey, we're talking to the CIO and we're working on the ROI, and I go, oh, have you actually entered into the POC and things? No, they want to do the ROI now. And I go, this is a really bad sign. It means that they're going to try and justify a purchase based upon hard metrics that you don't even know if you can prove that you're going to be able to achieve those. I said, you need to stop, reset, and consider that they don't understand our value and how to evaluate this software. Needless to say, the deal didn't happen, right? And it's because from the outset, they were focused on, they were appeasing the customer to the extent that they weren't helping them. They were trying to force a square peg in a round hole. Whereas business cases towards the end, they already understand and feel the value and know what they're going to do. Now it's a checkbox exercise. Okay, let's just make sure we can build some conservative numbers here. That makes sense.
Right, because that CEO or whoever is going to approve the funding, what's the first question they're going to ask is, have you seen this work?
Exactly. Yeah. So why are we doing this? And
Right.
I think they're more interested in the sentiment of the person sponsoring the project as opposed to the objective numbers. And that's quite critical, which leads into another point, which one of your videos a while back, I remember you were saying, we're the ones to tell them how to buy. We're the ones to show them, right? And that's okay, because if you think about the people that we are selling to, they have day jobs. They're not specialists in our space, understanding how to evaluate the marketplace. And there are two ways in which I've seen, I guess, reps go down the path of trying to lead a sales cycle. And one is you send in your stupid battle cards, you versus all the other competitors. The worst thing ever, because the first thing you do there is obviously they're always skewed to you to make you look better.
Right. They don't believe it.
But then the other side of it is, if you're sending in a battle card, you're actually validating that you are comparable to someone else, right? And then that makes the prospect think, well, maybe I should take a greater look, because I know this battle card's BS anyway. So now I'm going to go do that. So, but the type of information that I found works well in terms of leading and guiding a prospect through a sales cycle is to give them things such as, what do external analysts say about the space that I'm in? They don't have to name drop our solution, but they can talk. There'll be quotes and commentary and reports that explain why other people are doing this and why this is important. Or perhaps it's, what a customer is referencing from you, which is kind of a standard one. But I always find there's an interesting gap where once a customer buys, if you get a reference from a customer before they've actually realized their value and they say, this is why we chose these guys, right? Because then the prospect can relate to that decision-making process with someone who has just taken that leap of faith, right? They can go, I get it. Yeah. And I did that just last year with a CIO, got him in contact with the senior VP of another company who had only just purchased, but he said, this is why I made the leap. And it made him feel a lot better, because reference customers are great, but they've been there and done it. They're not waiting to get the pen to paper, and they don't feel those nerves anymore, right? So it makes it more relevant.
And that's it, because we think just because they act like they know what they're doing, that they know what they're doing.
Yeah. You're right. They don't always.
Yeah. And, I've been at a big company, and trust me, they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's like, probably everyone's too young to remember MASH, the show. It's like Radar O'Reilly was always assigned to try and get the impossible done, get supplies, get ribs, all the way to South Korea, right? And he just had to figure it out, because nobody knew how to get anything done.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what companies are like.
Yeah. It's interesting, because when a lot of the times at first it'll be we know our thing, we know what we're doing or whatever, but then it gets to a point where you have to consider that if they're not following your lead and that they want to get the right outcome, you sometimes have to grab them by the scruff of the neck and say, I'm telling you now, what you're doing is not helping you. All right. And though it took me a while, probably about 4 years ago is when I started to do that, when I got in the groove with the company I'm with now. And I realized it's very powerful. I've had arguments with prospects. I've been like, no, you're wrong. You need to, and then we work together, and it builds that relationship, if anything. So it's a really interesting concept of guiding them through the cycle.
That's it. I can't tell you the number of times I've been on, it was third or fourth call where a VP goes, I want an enterprise bid. And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like,
Nope.
and I've had my manager jump up and down in the parking lot. We've got to put a $3 million deal on the table. I go, it's going to go nowhere.
Yeah, yeah,
I go, because this guy doesn't know, thinks he knows what he's doing.
yeah,
But he's going to take that to the CEO, and the CEO is going to go, why?
yeah, yeah,
Or,
exactly.
let's do 30K.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
you don't really have a deal. You get some tiny little experiment.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. So, yeah, and I think the way in which they purchase your software, if they're asking for something which is non-standard with how your customers typically buy, it's a big red flag.
Yeah.
It means they don't understand something. It's usually a misunderstanding as to why. So, for example, when I sell our software, sometimes prospects will say, "Well, I know we've got 100,000 to cover our estate. It'd be 100,000 licenses, but we want to start with 5,000." And I'll go, "Okay, I understand that appears to be the risk-averse approach, but what you're doing there is you're actually going to fail in the operationalization and the adoption of our software, which will mean that you won't expand anyway, and you'll churn from us within a year. No problem." And then I say, "Look, but in the POC, this will become a lot more obvious to you. So let's go through it, and then you'll see that almost every use case that you said is interesting will fall flat on its face if you try go down that path." Right. So yeah, it's important to look for those signs as well.
And how did you learn this? Did you have a great mentor, or was it trial and error? Was it?
Yeah, I've just had the honestly, I've had the experience. So a few things. For me, at least at NextThink, one of the most important things I had was the first 3 to 4 months with my director at the time, who had just come out of the field, who had already been selling the software, just kind of taught me to pitch, right? And that was the first thing to get my initial conversations going. But a lot of it really did come down to trial and error. I had a very, very good couple of solutions consultants in the first 2 years of working for the company. And I think I can give a lot of credit, but at least for me, I find I've got this weird brain where if something works or sounds right or makes sense, it just sticks in my brain, and I just repeat it until it's proven otherwise. And so over especially the first 2 years, I mean, just back to the point of ROI, I remember having a presentation it looked like an economics exam, all these bending lines of the ROI that I built. Ryan, the deal went nowhere. It didn't close. And from that point forward, I thought, I know what's happened here. I've entered into, I'm trying to sell a solution in a way that just doesn't work. So then I adapted to that situation. So yeah, all these different things have come just for a lot of trial and error. And fortunately, it didn't take I'd say about 18 months, 2 years before the penny really dropped of a way and a methodology to approach selling our software that at least worked for me and has proven to work for some others as well. So that's good.
That's fast, because I've seen people with 10 times that experience still not get it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's always, I mean, it's not like, oh, look how great I am. No, it's more just, I think in the context of selling our solution, I think it's important, they say the definition of insanity, keep doing something that doesn't work over and over again, expecting the same results or expecting different results. And so, yeah, it was just a matter of adapting to those scenarios. But to be honest, I think early on, I started on just raw energy and a belief that I'm going to do really well. And in that process, I didn't realize that my desire to do really well was forcing me to keep smashing into walls where I'm making mistakes, but I was quickly learning from them. And then suddenly 18 months, 2 years later, I realized, and it was just one agreement that we did, and it all panned out. I guess my assumptions came to fruition. I was like, I need to test if this is going to work. And it worked. And then it's worked again and again and again and again.
Now, was it the losing that hurt you so bad, or was it the desire to win? Because a lot of people make the mistakes and just keep making them and assume it's something outside of them.
It was more the desire to win. Like it was the desire to make an impact. And here's the thing in the world of sales, right? I always say, anyone who joins a company and is really excited and energetic and believes that they've got amazing, that they're going to do amazing, I think that's great. But let's be candid. the belief in your potential is nothing until it's proven, right? Right. So when I started selling cell phones, right, I believed, and not in an arrogant way, I believed I want to do more than this for my
Yeah.
future of my career. But I made sure I was the best at mopping that floor and selling the most cell phones ever.
Yeah.
I needed to make sure I had that foundation, because that gave me both confidence, but then also gave me a real reason to say, yes, I can now step up. And I think that happens in sales as people go into an enterprise. They believe that they were born with this amazing gift, right? And they think that if something goes wrong, they're not the common denominator. It's some other issue, but that's accountability, right?
Right.
And they spin around year after year, bouncing around, and they'll reference a deal from 5 years ago that was given to them or something, right?
Right. That they won.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's the difference between, fluff and having solid density in your capabilities. And that comes with time and, making lots of good small decisions. So yeah, that's one of the things I found as well.
Cool. Hey, I really enjoyed this conversation. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
So they can connect via email if they like. I have no problem with that. So I don't know how to get the email out there, but or I'm even open to phone calls as well. Or LinkedIn, of course, as always. Most contact on LinkedIn as well.